Zarnok arrived on Earth with his elite squad of warriors from the Vornax Dominion. The ship touched down in the center of a military base the humans had built to monitor any potential threats. His warriors stood tall, their armor gleaming with the precision of their technology. Zarnok looked around with a sense of superiority he had never felt before. His species was renowned for its advanced military technology and their unshakable resolve. They had conquered countless planets, enslaving species they deemed weaker. The humans, however, were a mystery to him. They had evolved quickly. Their technology was far from perfect, but it was unpredictable and resourceful that intrigued him. He saw the humans below as primitive, not worthy of his time or attention. Yet the council had sent him to assess them to decide if they were to be absorbed into the growing empire. Zarnok surveyed the humans standing at attention, their uniforms simple compared to the ornate designs of his own species, their armor worn, not as polished, but functional in his eyes. It was laughable, crude pieces of metal barely able to withstand the might of his race's weaponry. A few of his warriors snickered at the sight. Zarnok's eyes flickered to the human leader, Captain Grant, who stood at the front of the formation, a tall figure with eyes that seemed to pierce through Zarnok's very being. Grant's gaze was unwavering. It was not the eyes of someone who feared an invasion. No, this was the gaze of someone who had stared death in the face and emerged victorious. Zarnok narrowed his eyes, and in a loud voice that echoed across the field, he addressed the humans. "You call that armor an insult to any true warrior?" He said, his words dripping with disdain. The humans remained silent, not reacting to his taunts. Zarnok scoffed. The captain's expression didn't change, but Zarnok could see the tension building within the humans. They were preparing for something, but what he wondered. Zarnok turned his attention back to Captain Grant. "What is your name, human?" he asked, still mocking the man's apparent calm. Captain Grant stepped forward without hesitation. He stood tall despite his lack of armor compared to Zarnok's warriors' enhanced suits. "You are Captain Grant of Earth's military," he said, his voice firm and calm, his hand resting on the hilt of his blade. Zarnok raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Now that you have seen the strength of my warriors and the might of our weapons, do you still think your armor will protect you from us?" Zarnok mocked. Captain Grant gave a small smile, his eyes never leaving Zarnok's gaze. "Our armor is just one layer of protection," he said calmly. "We rely on our minds, our bodies, and our spirits to carry us through battle, not just the tech you so highly value." Zarnok chuckled at his words, an obvious sign of arrogance rippling through his every motion. "You believe that you can survive without advanced armor or weapons?" he asked incredulously. "What a foolish thought." Zarnok turned to his warriors and gave a brief nod. Captain Grant looked to his soldiers, then back to Zarnok. "We may not have your technology, but we fought wars that made us stronger in ways you can't imagine," he said. There was a challenge in his voice. Zarnok frowned a moment before his lips curled into a smirk. "You wish to fight us without the protection of your armor?" he asked, his voice filled with a dangerous amusement. "Very well, let us see how your fragile human body fares without it." He gestured to Captain Grant, his warriors ready to see the outcome of this challenge. Zarnok's eyes gleamed with excitement as he waited for the human to react. Captain Grant nodded his head slowly without hesitation. He began to remove the heavy armor that covered his body piece by piece. Zarnok was puzzled. What was this human doing? This was an act of desperation, surely, Zarnok thought as the helmet came off and was tossed to the ground. The human's face was weathered and scarred. There was no fear in his eyes, only resolve. The armor fell to the ground with a heavy thud. Zarnok's warriors looked on in disbelief. Captain Grant stood bare-chested beneath the weight of his own history, his muscles tensed, as though they had already prepared for the fight ahead. He looked up at Zarnok, then into the eyes of his warriors as though he had accepted his fate. And now it was time to prove himself. Zarnok couldn't hide his surprise. He had expected the human to cower or beg for mercy, but instead Captain Grant stood proud and unafraid, his eyes locked onto Zarnok's, ready for whatever challenge lay ahead. Zarnok's confusion deepened as Captain Grant stood before him without a hint of fear or hesitation. The young alien warrior had never seen a human so calm in the face of certain defeat. He had assumed that removing their armor would be a sign of surrender, yet the human leader was staring at him with eyes that burned with intensity. Zarnok took a step forward, ready to show the human his mistake. But before he could say anything, Captain Grant spoke again. "There is no surrender here," he said, his voice carrying over the tense silence. "We fight, because it is what we do, and we never stop fighting." Zarnok paused. The words were strange to him. His species fought because it was necessary for dominance. But this human spoke as if fighting was something far deeper. It was as if this was not just a contest of strength, but a matter of principle. Zarnok's warriors was still unsure whether to join in the mocking or to step back in uncertainty, but Zarnok raised his hand, signaling them to stay still. The alien warrior sized up Captain Grant once more and felt a flicker of doubt. He had expected the human to buckle under the weight of such a challenge, but there was something in his eyes that Zarnok couldn't quite understand, something beyond just physical strength, something that spoke to the core of the human spirit. Captain Grant's expression never wavered. He stood there without armor, yet there was a certain power in his stance. Zarnok couldn't deny it. It was the power of someone who had been through pain and sacrifice, someone who had lost and fought through the loss, someone who had stood in the darkest places and still managed to rise. Zarnok sneered, still not fully understanding. It was clear that the human was trying to provoke him, make him underestimate him, and Zarnok could see how the other alien warriors watched carefully, waiting for the outcome. Yet Zarnok was beginning to realize something unsettling about the way humans fought. It was not just about their strength or technology. It was about the resolve that drove them. Captain Grant took a step towards Zarnok without a hint of fear, still calm, even as the young warrior cracked his knuckles in preparation for the fight. "You want to see how we fight without armor," the captain said in a low growl. "Then come at me, show me how your technology and strength can defeat what we are." Zarnok felt a strange wave of anger rise inside him. This human's challenge made his skin crawl with the need to show dominance, to prove that his species was superior. Zarnok stepped forward, eyes flashing with determination. He extended his arm toward the human, ready to show him the might of the Vornax dominion. Yet the moment he closed the gap, something changed. The human's eyes flickered. But there was no fear or hesitation. Captain Grant's entire being shifted, his movements smooth and fluid. The captain moved faster than Zarnok had expected, ducking and weaving in a way that seemed too quick for a human without armor. Zarnok swung with all his might, expecting to land a hit that would crush the human's ribs. But Captain Grant was already gone. Sidestepping with an effortless grace, Zarnok missed the blow and stumbled slightly. The captain was not where he had expected him to be. Captain Grant was already circling around him, his movements calculated with experience, as though he knew every step of this battle before it even happened. Zarnok's mind raced. He had never fought anything like this before. There was no hesitation in the human's movements, no fear of being struck. The captain's tactics were unpredictable and unnerving, as though he had fought battles like this all his life. Zarnok growled in frustration and rushed forward again. But this time his movements were more deliberate, slow. The captain moved with him, his eyes locked onto Zarnok's every move, calculated with purpose. Captain Grant blocked his blows with minimal effort, redirecting the alien warrior's strength and making him miss each strike. Zarnok found himself becoming more enraged. This human was not using advanced tech or armor, but something else that Zarnok couldn't grasp, something primal that was driving him forward in battle. Zarnok's pride began to crack at the edges, and before he knew it, Captain Grant landed a solid blow to his midsection. Zarnok staggered back, his breath catching in his chest. The impact, not as hard as what his species would deliver, but it was enough to rattle him. Captain Grant's eyes burned brighter with resolve. He took another step forward, still unrelenting. And as Zarnok looked into those eyes, he realized something terrifying. Humans didn't need armor to fight. They fought because they refused to lose. They fought because they understood what it meant to push past their limits and keep moving forward, even when the odds were stacked against them. Zarnok's chest heaved as he tried to regain his footing. Captain Grant had hit him harder than expected, but it wasn't the physical pain that rattled the young alien warrior. It was the realization that the human was not backing down. He had thought that by showing of his strength, he would intimidate the human, force him to falter. But instead, Captain Grant stood like an unshakable mountain, his eyes filled with unwavering resolve. Zarnok tried to steady his breath, and focus. The battle wasn't supposed to be like this. It was supposed to be an easy victory, yet here, he was struggling to land a blow as Captain Grant circled him gracefully. Zarnok charged again, hoping to use his superior speed and strength to overpower the human, but Captain Grant was already moving before he had even launched his attack. The humans seemed to anticipate his every move. It was like fighting against someone who had already seen every possible outcome. Zarnok was growing frustrated, and as his anger flared, he began to make mistakes. His strikes became wild and reckless, aiming only to land a hit, but missing each time. Captain Grant dodged with ease, his body flowing around Zarnok's like water. The human's movements were smooth, effortless, and Zarnok could see the strategy behind them. Each dodge was a calculated step that forced him into a disadvantageous position. With every failed attack, Zarnok's confidence waned a little more until he felt a sudden tightness in his chest, a doubt that had never existed before. It wasn't just that Captain Grant was dodging his blows, it was the way the captain moved, like a seasoned warrior who had lived through countless battles and always found a way to survive. Zarnok had never encountered a species like this one before. He had always known that the Vornax Dominion was superior in combat, but now he wasn't so sure anymore. Captain Grant's fighting style wasn't based on strength or technology, it was based on experience, something Zarnok didn't understand. Zarnok took a step back, trying to regain control of the situation. Captain Grant stopped moving for a brief moment, his expression unchanged, but his eyes never left Zarnok's. He didn't even winded. The young alien warrior's mind raced. What was it that allowed this human to keep fighting with no sign of giving up? What was it that made them so relentless? As if sensing Zarnok's confusion, Captain Grant spoke again. Your kind may have technology, your armor, your weapons, but none of that matters if you don't know how to use them, he said, his voice calm but heavy with meaning. You fight because you've been taught to fight with tools. We fight because it's in our nature. We survive not because we have the best weapons, but because we refuse to stop. Zarnok's heart skipped a beat. Captain Grant's words hit harder than any punch he had delivered during the fight. The young alien warrior hadn't considered that maybe it wasn't about the tools or the technology. After all, it was about the will to survive, the determination to keep moving forward, no matter what. Zarnok's mind reeled as he tried to process what Captain Grant had just said. In all his years as a warrior, he had been taught to rely on his species' superior technology, his weapons, his armor. But now he was fighting a human who didn't rely on anything except his own willpower, his own strength. And that strength was something Zarnok couldn't defeat with just his fists. Captain Grant moved again, this time faster than before. Zarnok barely had time to react before the captain was upon him. The human's movements were like lightning. Zarnok tried to block, but his arms felt heavy and slow. The next thing he knew, Captain Grant was on him, landing a series of quick jabs that forced him backward. Zarnok stumbled, trying to regain his balance, but the human didn't relent. Every time he thought he had a chance to recover, Captain Grant was already there, blocking and attacking with precision. Zarnok's entire body ached, his mind racing with thoughts of how to counter the human's tactics. But each time he tried something new, the captain was already one step ahead. It was as if the human had anticipated his every move from the very start. Zarnok's frustration reached a boiling point. He could feel his pride slipping away. But even as his confidence crumbled, he couldn't deny that there was something about the human that was impossible to ignore, something that made him feel small in comparison. Captain Grant landed another solid blow, this time to his chest, and Zarnok's vision blurred. He staggered backward, barely able to keep himself upright. His breath raged in his chest. This time, it wasn't just the pain of the blow, it was the realization that the human had won the battle. Zarnok stood there gasping for air, unable to comprehend how it had happened. He had underestimated the human race in a way he never should have. They didn't fight because they were stronger or better equipped. They fought because they refused to give up, and in that moment, Zarnok realized that was the one thing he couldn't defeat: the human spirit. Zarnok stood there gasping, trying to steady his breath. His body screamed with pain from the blows Captain Grant had landed. His pride shattered into pieces around him. He had been so sure that his strength and his advanced technology would be enough to crush the human resistance. But now he realized how wrong he had been. His arms felt heavy, as if his own muscles were betraying him, his mind racing, trying to find some way to regain control of the situation. But there was nothing left to grasp, nothing to hold on to. Captain Grant stood still, his posture calm and composed, as if he had not just endured an intense battle. The human's eyes locked onto Zarnok with an intensity that made the young warrior feel small. The captain's chest rose and fell steadily while Zarnok struggled to keep himself from collapsing. Captain Grant took a step forward slowly and confidently. He didn't seem to be in a rush. There was no need for urgency, as if the battle had already been decided before it had even started. Zarnok clenched his fists, refusing to show weakness. But his legs felt like they would give way any moment. The captain's movements were like a dance, every step calculated, every move purposeful, and Zarnok realized that Captain Grant wasn't just skilled in combat, he was skilled in life. The captain fought with purpose, every decision, every strike made with a deeper meaning. Zarnok had been so focused on his own strength, his own superiority, that he hadn't understood what it truly meant to fight. He thought it was about who could hit harder or wear better armor. But now he realized that true strength was not just in the body, it was in the heart, the will to keep fighting, the will to never give up. Zarnok swallowed hard, his throat dry. He glanced at his warriors, who were watching him with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. They had never seen him falter before, never seen him struggle the way he was now. His entire image of invincibility had been broken before them, and he didn't know how to fix it. Captain Grant spoke again, his voice calm, but carrying an undeniable weight. "You fought well," he said, his words simple, but they rang with meaning. Zarnok's chest tightened as the human's gaze pierced into him. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever acknowledged him as anything other than an invincible warrior. The recognition from Captain Grant sent a ripple of emotion through Zarnok's chest, and for a moment he wondered if he was truly worthy of the title he had fought so hard for. The captain's eyes softened just slightly, but the fire in them never dimmed. "You were strong, Zarnok, but you didn't fight like a warrior. You fought like someone who had everything to lose." Zarnok wanted to argue, to say something, to defend himself, but the words didn't come. All he could do was stand there in stunned silence as the captain's words settled over him like a cold blanket. The truth that he hadn't been prepared to face was right there in front of him. His strength, his power, his technology, none of it mattered, because it was not the essence of what it meant to fight. Captain Grant stepped back a little, letting Zarnok breathe, but never taking his eyes off him. "You have power, you have strength, Zarnok, but you don't understand the fight we fight, not because we have to, but because it's in us, because we are alive, and we fight to keep it that way." Zarnok's eyes widened as the words sank into his mind, fighting for survival, not because of the need to conquer, but because of something far deeper, something that had always been inside of him, but he had never realized it, something that the humans understood on a level he could not yet comprehend. Captain Grant didn't wait for a response. He simply turned and walked away, leaving Zarnok standing there alone in the clearing, surrounded by his warriors. But there was no celebration, no sense of victory in the air. Zarnok looked around at the humans, still standing there, silent faces, offering no judgment, only understanding. Zarnok's heart pounded in his chest. He felt like he was seeing the world for the first time. Everything he had known, his species, his dominance, it all seemed so insignificant in this moment. Captain Grant's words echoed in his mind, and with each echo the truth became clearer. He had lost not because he was weak, not because his strength failed, but because he had misunderstood the very nature of what it meant to fight in this world. Strength was not something you could measure by weapons or armor. It was something that lived deep inside, something that could not be taken or given. It had to be earned, and Zarnok realized that day that he had to earn it too. Zarnok stood there, staring at the captain's retreating back, his mind still struggling to process everything that had happened. The ground beneath him felt foreign, now, as if he had lost his place in the world he had known for so long. All of his training, all of his battles had led to this moment, and now he felt something he had never felt before. Uncertainty. The feeling gnawed at him like a predator circling its prey. He wasn't sure what to do, or even what to think. Captain Grant had left him with so many unanswered questions. Zarnok's gaze flickered to his warriors, who were now eyeing him with curiosity and unease. They were waiting for him to speak, for him to tell them what came next. But Zarnok had no words. His mouth felt dry, and his thoughts were scattered like leaves in a storm. There was nothing he could say, nothing that would fix the situation. The captain's challenge had shattered something inside him, and the pieces couldn't be put back together so easily. He took a deep breath, his body aching from the fight. But it was more than just physical pain. It was the emotional weight of realizing how much he still had to learn about combat, about humanity, and about himself. Zarnok's warriors waited patiently, but he could see the doubt creeping into their eyes. They had never seen him falter before, never seen him lose. But now they saw a leader who was not as invincible as they had believed. It made Zarnok question himself. For the first time in his life, did they still see him as a leader? Did they still see him as the warrior who had led them to victory after victory? Or had he lost their respect? Captain Grant's words echoed in his mind again. We fight, not because we have to, but because it's in us. Zarnok looked up at the horizon, trying to clear the fog in his mind. He had spent so much time focusing on his species' technology and weapons that he had forgotten something crucial about the fight itself. It wasn't just about victory or defeat. It was about resilience. It was about the fire that burned within the soul of a warrior. Captain Grant had fought not to prove his superiority, but to survive, and Zarnok realized that was something he had never fully understood. Captain Grant had faced death in every battle and come out the other side, still standing. He had fought for something beyond himself, for something greater than just the conquest of planets. Zarnok could feel that now, like a distant echo in his mind. It wasn't the power of his species or the might of his weapons that made him a true warrior. It was his will to keep fighting, to keep moving forward, even when everything seemed lost. Zarnok looked down at his hands, and for the first time in his life, he questioned them. They were strong, yes, but did they have the same resolve that Captain Grant had shown? Was he truly a warrior? Or was he just someone who relied on the technology of his species to carry him through the battles of life? Zarnok's gaze shifted back to the humans, still standing at attention. They had fought not for glory, not for conquest, for something deeper, and he realized that was what had made them strong. That was the heart of humanity, and it was something that couldn't be measured by weapons or armor. Zarnok turned away from the humans, not because he was afraid, but because he needed time to think. He needed time to reflect on what had just happened. He had never considered that there was more to strength than just physical prowess. He had always assumed that power came from domination, that true warriors were those who could crush their enemies without hesitation. But Captain Grant had shown him a different kind of strength, a strength that came from within, a strength that didn't rely on the tools you wielded, but on the will to never stop fighting. Zarnok walked away slowly as the weight of his realization pressed down on him. He had a long journey ahead of him, a journey that would require him to look beyond the surface of his strength and power. He would need to learn what it truly meant to be a warrior, to fight for something greater than just victory, to fight with the fire of survival burning deep within his soul. As he walked into the distance, Zarnok knew one thing for certain: he would never fight the same way again. Zarnok wandered deep into the forest, his footsteps heavy with the weight of his thoughts. He had never felt so lost before. The landscape around him seemed to stretch endlessly like a vast, unfamiliar ocean, each step pulling him farther from the place he had once believed he understood. His mind raced with 1,000 questions, but each one seemed to only lead to another unanswered question. Captain Grant's words still echoed in his mind. We fight, not because we have to, but because it's in us. Zarnok had never known a truth like this. It was like discovering that the foundation he had built his entire existence on had cracked, and now he was standing on unstable ground. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that Captain Grant was right. Zarnok's life had always been about strength and power, but it had never been about survival. It had never been about the will to keep going when everything else seemed hopeless. It had always been about domination, about showing the superiority of the Vornax dominion. But now he could see the flaw in that thinking, the flaw that had led him to this point of realization. Zarnok paused and looked up at the sky. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. He felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. As the day turned to night, for the first time he wasn't consumed by the need to fight, to prove his strength to others. Instead, he felt a quiet understanding, a deep sense of connection to the world around him. It was as if he had been given the chance to start over, to rewrite his own definition of what it meant to be a warrior. He knew now that the fight wasn't just about physical strength or the best weapon. The fight was about the soul, the will to continue, even when the odds were stacked against you. Zarnok took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs. He felt the weight of his body, his muscles, aching from the earlier battle. But it didn't matter anymore. He had learned something far more important than physical prose. He had learned the power of perseverance, and that was a power that could not be defeated with any weapon or technology. It was a power that came from within. Zarnok turned back toward the camp. He could feel the weight of his warriors' gazes on him as he re-entered the clearing. They were waiting for him to return to them, to resume his role as their leader. But he knew that something had changed in him. He wasn't the same warrior who had left the group moments ago. He had seen a different side of combat, and now he needed to find a way to convey that to his people. He needed to show them that strength was not about conquering others. It was about conquering yourself. The warriors were silent as Zarnok approached. They had no idea what he had been through, what he had learned in the depths of the forest. They only knew that their leader had returned. And he looked different. Something in his eyes had changed. Something in the air around him had shifted. Zarnok stood before them, and for the first time he didn't feel the need to prove himself. He didn't need to show them how powerful he was, or how strong the Vornax Dominion could be. Instead, he stood there quietly gathering his thoughts. A silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before he spoke. "When we fight not to dominate or destroy," he said, his voice steady and calm, but full of a newfound strength. "We fight because it is our nature, but we also fight because we are alive. We fight to keep moving forward, to survive." Zarnok's voice faltered slightly, but he pushed on. "We have strength in our bodies, yes, but true strength comes from within. It comes from the will to keep fighting when everything else is lost. It comes from a heart that refuses to surrender, even in the face of defeat." His words hung in the air, and for the first time Zarnok saw his warriors not as followers, but as equals. He saw them as individuals with their own hearts, their own fire burning within them. And in that moment he understood that a true leader wasn't one who wielded power to control others. It was one who could ignite the fire within their people and inspire them to keep fighting, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Zarnok paused and let his words sink in. The warriors stood there in silence, but their faces were no longer filled with doubt. Instead, they looked at him with a new understanding, a new respect. Zarnok felt a weight lift from his shoulders as the realization dawned on him. He was no longer just a warrior leading a group. He was a leader helping to shape the future of his people. They would no longer fight out of fear or for conquest. They would fight because it was who they were, and because it was the only way to truly live. Zarnok turned to look at the horizon, once more his heart swelling with a new sense of purpose. And as the sun set behind him, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for him. And for his people, they had learned the most important lesson of all. They would fight not to dominate, but to survive. The days following Zarnok's realization were quiet but heavy with the weight of change. His warriors seemed to understand the shift in their leader. They moved differently now, as if each one had found a new purpose in their actions. Their steps were more deliberate, more thoughtful, and Zarnok watched them closely, seeing the fire within them flicker brighter with each passing moment. It wasn't just the physical strength that had changed. It was something deeper, something more intangible. But he could feel it. It was the strength of will that Captain Grant had shown him, the determination to never stop fighting, no matter the odds. Zarnok had made it his mission to spread this understanding among his people. He spoke to them every chance he got, teaching them that true power didn't lie in technology or weapons, but in the will to survive and to protect those you cared about. At first, the warriors were skeptical. They had always known their strength came from their superior technology, their advanced armor and weapons. But as they trained with Zarnok, they began to see what he meant. They began to understand that true strength came from within, not from the tools you wielded, but from the heart and mind that drove your actions. Zarnok's influence began to spread slowly at first, but it was undeniable, and soon it wasn't just the warriors who had changed. It was the entire camp. There was a new energy in the air, a sense of unity and purpose that had never existed before. Zarnok could see the transformation in the way his people interacted with one another. They no longer fought for glory or power, They fought for each other, they fought to survive, and to protect their way of life. It wasn't easy, though there were still moments of doubt, moments when the warriors questioned whether this new way of fighting could truly lead them to victory. But Zarnok reminded them of the lesson he had learned from Captain Grant. True strength wasn't about victory or defeat. It was about the willingness to fight no matter the outcome. It was about the refusal to surrender even when all seemed lost, and over time, the warriors began to believe in this new path. They began to see that they didn't need to rely on superior weapons or technology to win battles. They could rely on their own strength of will, their own determination, and their connection to each other. Zarnok knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be battles to fight, still enemies to face. But he also knew that his people were stronger now than they had ever been. They had discovered something greater than physical power. They had discovered the power of unity and resilience. Zarnok stood at the edge of the camp one evening, looking out into the distance. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He thought about everything that had led him to this moment, the battles, the pain, the realization that had come crashing down on him like a wave. But now he saw everything differently. He saw his people differently, and he saw himself differently as well. He wasn't just a warrior anymore, he was a leader, not because he was the strongest or the most powerful, but because he had the ability to inspire others to fight not just for survival, but for something more. Zarnok turned back to the camp. His warriors gathered around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flames. He could feel the strength in the air. It was a strength that didn't come from their weapons or their armor. It came from the hearts of the people who fought beside him. He walked toward them slowly, each step filled with a newfound confidence, a confidence that came not from power, but from purpose. When he reached the fire, Zarnok stood tall and looked at each of his warriors. He saw no fear, no doubt, only determination in their eyes. And he knew in that moment that they were ready to face whatever came next, because they had learned what it truly meant to fight not for dominance, not for glory, but for survival, and for each other. Zarnok's voice was steady and strong. When he spoke, "We are ready," he said simply, and the warriors nodded in unison, their resolve clear. They had learned the most important lesson of all, that strength was not about conquering the world around them, but about conquering themselves, and together they would face whatever challenges the future held with a courage that could not be broken. The following morning, the camp was alive with activity. Zarnok could feel the buzz of anticipation in the air. His warriors were preparing for something bigger, something more dangerous than anything they had faced before. The lessons they had learned, the strength they had discovered within themselves would be tested like never before. Zarnok stood at the edge of the camp, overlooking the dense jungle beyond the trees, loomed ominously as if hiding secrets of the unknown. He had led his people through many battles, but this felt different this time. They weren't fighting to prove their superiority or to dominate. They were fighting to protect what they had built together, to protect the fire that had ignited in each of them. Zarnok turned to his second-in-command, Relak, who stood beside him watching the camp with a quiet intensity. The same fire that burned in Zarnok's chest seemed to burn in Relak's eyes too. Zarnok could sense the shift in his friend, his comrade. He could see that Relak had embraced the same realization, that he had embraced the realization that true strength came from within and not from the weapons they wielded. Relak spoke quietly, his voice calm, but filled with conviction. "We've come a long way, Zarnok. We've learned what it means to fight for something greater than ourselves. We've learned what it means to survive." Zarnok nodded, but his gaze never wavered from the jungle ahead. "We are ready," he said, his voice steady and sure. Relak placed a hand on Zarnok's shoulder, his grip firm and supportive. "We fight for each other now. We fight for our people, for the future of the Vornax Dominion." Zarnok felt the weight of those words, and for the first time he understood the full scope of what they were about to face. It wasn't just about winning this battle. It was about ensuring that their way of life, their newfound strength, would survive, that it would continue to grow and spread to those who needed it most. As the warriors gathered around for the briefing, Zarnok could see the determination in their faces. They had been through so much together, and now they were ready to face their biggest challenge. Yet they weren't fighting just for survival, they were fighting for something more, something that would define their legacy. Zarnok addressed them, his voice carrying across the group. "Today, We face a threat unlike anything we have encountered before. This enemy is powerful, but they are not invincible. Just like us, they have their weaknesses. Just like us, they have their doubts. We fight, not just for victory. We fight to show that our strength is not in our weapons, but in our will, our unity, and our determination to never give up. His words sparked a fire in the warriors' hearts. They stood taller, their eyes shining with the same resolve that had taken root in Zarnok's soul. They were no longer just soldiers, they were a family bound by a shared purpose. Zarnok watched them all for a moment, letting the silence settle before he spoke again. Let's show them what it means to fight with heart. Let's show them what it means to never back down. His words were simple, but they held a power of their own. They had learned what it meant to survive, and now they would fight to protect that survival. They would fight to protect each other and the future they had built together. The warriors gathered their weapons and began to move out in perfect unison. They were a well-oiled machine, each step in sync with the others. Zarnok walked among them, feeling the energy of their determination, their will to survive and to protect. The bond that tied them together was unbreakable. And for the first time, Zarnok felt truly connected to his people. He was no longer their leader by title alone. He was their leader because they had all fought for the same thing. And now they would fight together once more. The jungle was dark and foreboding as they entered it, but Zarnok could feel the strength of his warriors behind him. The air was thick with tension, but he knew that they were ready. They would face this enemy head-on, and they would show them that the strength of the Vornax dominion was not to be underestimated. As they moved deeper into the jungle, the silence around them was deafening. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a ripple of tension through the group. But Zarnok felt no fear. Instead, he felt a sense of calm, a sense of certainty that had been absent from his life for so long. They were not fighting for the sake of conquest or glory. They were fighting for something far more important, for the survival of everything they had come to cherish together. And in that moment, Zarnok knew that no matter what happened, they had already won. They had found their strength, they had found each other, and they would fight with everything they had. The following morning, the camp was alive with activity. Zarnok could feel the buzz of anticipation in the air. His warriors were preparing for something bigger, something more dangerous than anything they had faced before. The lessons they had learned, the strength they had discovered within themselves would be tested like never before. Zarnok stood at the edge of the camp, overlooking the dense jungle. Beyond the trees loomed ominously, as if hiding secrets of the unknown. He had led his people through many battles, but this felt different this time. They weren't fighting to prove their superiority or to dominate. They were fighting to protect what they had built together, to protect the fire that had ignited in each of them. Zarnok turned to his second-in-command, Relak, who stood beside him watching the camp with a quiet intensity. The same fire that burned in Zarnok's chest seemed to burn in Relak's eyes too. Zarnok could sense the shift in his friend, his comrade. He could see that Relak had embraced the same realization, that he had embraced the realization that true strength came from within, and not from the weapons they wielded. Relak spoke quietly, his voice calm, but filled with conviction. We've come a long way, Zarnok. We've learned what it means to fight for something greater than ourselves. We've learned what it means to survive. Zarnok nodded, but his gaze never wavered from the jungle ahead. We are ready, he said, his voice steady and sure. Relak placed a hand on Zarnok's shoulder, his grit firm and supportive. We fight for each other now. We fight for our people, for the future of the Vornax dominion. Zarnok felt the weight of those words, and for the first time he understood the full scope of what they were about to face. It wasn't just about winning this battle, it was about ensuring that their way of life, their newfound strength, would survive, that it would continue to grow and spread to those who needed it most. As the warriors gathered around for the briefing, Zarnok could see the determination in their faces. They had been through so much together, and now they were ready to face their biggest challenge. Yet they weren't fighting just for survival. They were fighting for something more, something that would define their legacy. Zarnok addressed them, his voice carrying across the group. Today, we face a threat unlike anything we have encountered before. This enemy is powerful, but they are not invincible. Just like us, they have their weaknesses. Just like us, they have their doubts. We fight not just for victory. We fight to show that our strength is not in our weapons, but in our will, our unity, and our determination to never give up his words sparked a fire in the warriors' hearts. They stood taller, their eyes shining with the same resolve that had taken root in Zarnok's soul. They were no longer just soldiers, they were a family bound by a shared purpose. Zarnok watched them all for a moment, letting the silence settle before he spoke again. Let's show them what it means to fight with heart. Let's show them what it means to never back down. His words were simple, but they held a power of their own. They had learned what it meant to survive, and now they would fight to protect that survival. They would fight to protect each other and the future they had built together. The warriors gathered their weapons and began to move out in perfect unison. They were a well-oiled machine, each step in sync with the others. Zarnok walked among them, feeling the energy of their determination. Their will to survive and to protect the bond that tied them together was unbreakable. And for the first time, Zarnok felt truly connected to his people. He was no longer their leader by title alone. He was their leader because they had all fought for the same thing. And now they would fight together once more. The jungle was dark and foreboding as they entered it, but Zarnok could feel the strength of his warriors behind him. The air was thick with tension, but he knew that they were ready. They would face his enemy head-on, and they would show them that the strength of the Vornax dominion was not to be underestimated. As they moved deeper into the jungle, the silence around them was deafening. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent a ripple of tension through the group, but Zarnok felt no fear. Instead, he felt a sense of calm, a sense of certainty that had been absent from his life for so long. They were not fighting for the sake of conquest or glory. They were fighting for something far more important, for the survival of everything they had come to cherish together. And in that moment, Zarnok knew that no matter what happened, they had already won. They had found their strength, they had found each other, and they would fight with everything they had. The battle was fierce. The jungle seemed to come alive with the clash of weapons and the roar of combat. Zarnok could hear the cries of his warriors and the shouts of the enemy as the two forces collided. It was chaos, but it was a controlled chaos. Every movement, every strike was purposeful, each warrior acting not just as an individual, but as part of something greater, as part of a unified whole. Zarnok moved through the battlefield with a calm determination, his blade cutting through the air with precision, his focus unwavering. The enemy was strong, but Zarnok could see their weakness, their lack of unity. They fought as individuals driven by greed and ambition, not by a collective will to survive. The warriors of the Vornax dominion fought differently. They fought for each other, they fought for something greater than themselves, and Zarnok could feel that strength coursing through him. With every strike, with every breath, the battle raged on. But Zarnok felt no fear. He felt only the resolve to protect his people, to protect the future they had built together. His warriors were with him. They were fighting with all their might, and they were pushing the enemy back inch by inch. The tide of battle was turning, and Zarnok could see it. His people were stronger now than ever before. They were no longer just warriors. They were a force to be reckoned with. They were united by a shared purpose, and that purpose was more powerful than any weapon the enemy could bring to bear. Zarnok could feel the weight of the battle lifting as the enemy faltered, their ranks beginning to crumble under the relentless assault of the Vornax warriors. They had underestimated the strength of Zarnok's people. They had thought that technology and power would be enough to win the day, but they had failed to understand the one thing that truly mattered, the one thing that no weapon or armor could ever replicate: the strength of the human spirit, the will to fight even when the odds were impossible. Zarnok saw the leader of the enemy forces ahead. He was standing tall, surrounded by his guards. He was a massive figure clad in heavy armor and wielding a weapon that glowed with an ominous light. Zarnok's eyes narrowed. This was the final test, the one who had led them here, the one who had forced them to fight not for dominance, but for survival. Zarnok moved forward, cutting through the chaos around him, his warriors following in his wake. They were unstoppable, now driven by the fire within them, driven by the knowledge that they were fighting for something greater than just victory. They were fighting for their future, for their people, and for each other. When Zarnok reached the enemy leader, the two locked eyes for a moment, and in that instant Zarnok saw something in the leader's gaze, something that was almost regretful. It was as if the enemy leader understood too late the truth of what Zarnok and his people had learned, the truth that no amount of power or weaponry could ever replace the strength of unity and resolve. Zarnok raised his blade, and with one decisive strike, he brought the enemy leader to the ground, his warriors roaring in triumph around him. But Zarnok didn't join in the victory. He stood there in the midst of the battlefield, feeling the weight of the moment wash over him. The fight was over, but the lesson had already been learned. It wasn't just about surviving, it was about living with purpose. It was about knowing what you were fighting for and why. Zarnok turned away from the fallen leader, his warriors, still celebrating around him. But Zarnok felt no need to join them. He had already won. They had already won, not because of their strength or their weapons, but because of the will to survive and to protect one another. He looked back at his warriors and saw them with new eyes. They were no longer just soldiers. They were brothers and sisters, bound by the same unbreakable bond they had forged in the fires of battle. They had learned the most important lesson of all. They had learned that strength didn't come from weapons or armor. It came from within. It came from the fire that burned in their hearts. And that was a fire that could never be extinguished. Zarnok turned his gaze to the horizon, the sun beginning to rise once more. The world around him was quiet now. The battle had ended, but Zarnok knew that the fight was never truly over. The strength of his people would continue to grow. It would continue to burn bright. And they would face whatever challenges the future held with the same resolve and determination that had carried them through this battle. They had discovered something greater than victory. They had discovered the true meaning of strength. And with that knowledge, they would continue to fight, not for dominance, not for glory, but for the survival of everything they had come to cherish together. Zarnok smiled to himself, a small but genuine smile, the fire within him burning brighter than ever before.